My name's Matthew. I'm an alcoholic. Yeah, it turned out I really don't like Jim. It was a long, long drive. No, it was great. You've been a great host. Everything's been great. I got to listen to Ann today and Beverly, and I first of all, I always love it when they give the very long, involved anonymity thing. Like don't take his picture. And it may end up on the internet. Of the pictures of me that may end up on the internet, this is not the one I'm worried about. And so it's probably to protect you people that it doesn't end up on the internet. But the other thing that happened to me here is I'm on LA time and I'm all confused, and I went to bed way too early, and I was tired, and I got up around 6:30 your time, and so 3:30 in the morning my time, and I got dressed and I came down to the registration table at 8 o'clock, a little before 8, and there was nobody there, and there was another guy looking to register, and he introduced himself. He said, "My name's John." I said, "I don't think anyone's here." And he said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm going to go to breakfast." He said, "Let's go to breakfast." And we walked up the street to a coffee shop, and we sat down, and we talked about God. And I'd known the guy for 4 minutes. And I love Alcoholics Anonymous for that. It was very comfortable between us. I hope John's here. John, are you here? No, he didn't like me, apparently. You and Jim should get together. But I sure liked him. But that doesn't happen to me in any other situation unless I'm drunk. But I love AA, and I'm very, very honored to be here and be able to participate in my sobriety with you people. And I apologize. I had to ask that I leave tomorrow morning because I have little children, and I need to be there for Halloween, and I really do. But I do not. It's not my custom to leave a conference early, but I am a father, and that's important. And you guys gave me that, so suck it up. Anyway. I always pray in my room before I do this that I won't talk a lot about my drinking, so I want to talk about recovery. But Patty O once told me, you got to talk about your drinking so they know they can trust you. And I'll just tell you, my sobriety date's May 16th, 1993, and on May 14th, things weren't going very well. And May 14th, 1993, I weighed 108 pounds. Hadn't had a job in 6 or 7 months. I had literally, as far as I can recall, sat on my couch for 3 or 4 months and held my breath when the mailman came, because I didn't want anyone to know I was in the apartment. And I went next door occasionally because I lived right next door to a liquor store. And I just drank and tried to die in there. I want you to know that I don't come... My parents are not alcoholics. I always feel like I want to honor my parents and say that they were really good people. They were loving. My father worked very hard. My mother was a school teacher, and she worked very hard, and she had this quiet dignity about her. And my father was this great raucous Irishman, but they weren't alcoholics. Both my brothers are an alcoholic. One of them is sober, and I'm the youngest by 7 years. So I did grow up in an alcoholic home. But it wasn't like I've heard about. It was my brother, and I could see that alcohol was his problem. So I decided not to drink. When I saw how much pain he brought to my parents, he got a girl pregnant, and he's always disappearing for a few days at a time and wrecking the cars, and everybody was always upset. So when I was a little kid, I could see that alcohol was the problem, and I decided I'm not going to drink. Like he is. I'm not going to drink because I could see that. And when in high school, I didn't drink, when everybody else did. Because I had this chaos at my house, and it was a secret. But I was the youngest in this big Irish Catholic family, and all of my friends, I had the same 5 friends from first grade through high school, because I went to a small Catholic school, were the youngest in their big Irish Catholic family. So we had kind of a bond. And on my senior year, I think, and those 5 guys, I have to say, I thought they were better looking than me. I thought they were more talented than me. They were better at sports. They were smarter than me. I thought they hung out with me as a favor, for 12 years. They were really nicer than me, too. But I had this just less than feeling that I've heard talked about very much in Alcoholics Anonymous. So that senior night, we had a party at this guy's house right in Hermosa Beach overlooking the ocean sky at a beautiful house, and his parents had left town, and they got a bottle of tequila, and the 6 of us guys, and they started drinking tequila, and they weren't offering me any because they knew I didn't drink, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I felt so awkward inside my own skin. And, I had acne, and I was really, really skinny, and when they were all playing sports, I was playing my guitar in my room. And so I could do that, but I just felt so awkward and less than and different and outside that I said, hey, I'll have a drink of that. And they poured me a shot of tequila, and I took this shot of tequila, and I love talking about what happened next to you people, because only you understand, like my chest got warm, and 12 years of Catholic school guilt melted out of my shoulders. And my acne disappeared, and I became articulate and funny, and I was cool. Finally, I was cool, and it was great. I went and got a much larger glass and said, could I please have some more? And suddenly I thought, oh, this is why everybody does this. I just saw the chaos it brought in my house. And I drank this tequila, and we all were drinking, and we were having a great time. The 6 guys and no girls and a bottle of tequila. It's a Catholic school party. And I quickly noticed the no girls part. And I walked down the hall of this big house. I had to go to the bathroom, and it suddenly became like a steamship. It's like rocking. And I don't know why. And I get into the bathroom, and I'm not feeling that great, but I have to go to the bathroom. So I sit down on the toilet to go to the bathroom, and this is where God first enters my story. Because I was a Catholic school kid, and as the room began to spin, I thought, God would not make your body so it could defecate and vomit at the same time. Because God's a genius, right? And as I lurched for the sink and blacked out, it turns out I was really wrong about that. And that's possible. And I blacked out. And the funniest part of this story, it wasn't funny at the time, but I woke up on the bathroom floor in a sleeping bag with my head on a pillow like I had gone camping in the bathroom in the middle of the party. And it smelled vaguely of bleach. And so apparently what had happened is I passed out in between functions and landed on the floor, and my friends cleaned me up and put me in a sleeping bag and didn't mention it. And I went to school, and I had no clue why I went camping in the bathroom. And I got to school, and halfway through the day, I started to remember, and I just was filled with remorse and shame. I was shooting for cool, and I don't think you could overshoot the mark farther. Nothing cool about that. And I was embarrassed. And, I've heard a lot of people come to AA and speak at these podiums and say, I drank, I got deathly ill, and I couldn't wait to do it again. And the truth is, I felt like I was just like my brother, and I didn't want to do it ever again. I was ashamed. So I didn't. I didn't drink in high school. I drank one time. That was my first drink. And just before I left for college, my brother was homeless. And I was driving around looking for him every morning, and I'd see his car and look in the window and see him in there and go home. And I'm leaving for college, and my brother walks in the door and says, I'm sober, 60 days or whatever in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I need a place to stay. Can I stay here? And my parents said, if you're sober, you can stay here forever. And he went and came into the house, and we had tried so many things with him. It was like the prodigal son, and he was lying in the bathtub every morning reading this blue book, this big blue book. And in my house, big family, I just shaved in the bathroom while he was in the bathtub, and I'd look at that book and think, what is in that magic book? Because we tried everything. We didn't want to have a boy homeless in our family, but what could you do? He was destroying our lives, and he was sober, and he was bright-eyed, and he would tell you he was going to do something, and then he'd do it. And he'd tell the truth. My brother used to lie when the truth would serve him better. And he just changed right in front of me. So I went off to college, and I forgot I didn't drink. I know this is an AA meeting, but I forgot I didn't smoke pot and do acid too. And, right, Doug? Yeah. That wasn't on my list of do not do's. And I did a lot of stuff. But I don't really want to talk a lot about my adventures drinking. I graduated from college with honors. apparently my professor smoked pot too. and I went on the road with a rock and roll band, and I toured around the country, and it was my dream, and I practiced all my life for it, and I got thrown out of a rock and roll band for drinking alcohol. So I may not be a great guitar player, but I'm a great alcoholic, and it was funny. I remember the day they fired me. The guy who fired me was so nervous about it, he drank half a bottle of Wild Turkey to tell me I drank too much to be in the band. And he said, "I'm sorry, dude, you're just a pain." And I just missed the bus. I wouldn't be in the next city, and also I wouldn't show up for recording sessions. And they were right, And it's funny to joke about, but it was my dream, and I worked really hard. And very few people get that dream, and I had it, and I blew it, and it was terrible. I took a bus back. I lived in North Carolina, and took a bus back to California. And I lied. I told everybody I moved home to California because my mother had cancer, and I was going to take care of her. And the truth was, my mother had cancer. The lie was, that's why I went home. I never would have gone home. I would have stayed away till long past her death because I wanted to do what I was doing. And I liked being away because they didn't know what I was doing. And I got home to Los Angeles, and I got this job as a waiter at a Marie Callender's that I thought was beneath me. And then I remember thinking, this is a stupid, terrible job. I'm a rock star, for God's sakes. And then, in my head. And then, 3 days later, the manager looked at my application and said, "You went to college?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Great, you're going to be the manager now. You're going to be the Friday through Sunday night manager." And I thought that was beneath me, because I'm arrogant and I'm selfish. And I thought, the manager of this Marie Callender's. And then he took me around the restaurant, and he said, "Okay, here's how we keep the inventory on the freezer. Here are the keys to the office. This is how you do the books. Here's the chef's schedule. Here are the keys to the bar." And then he kept talking, and which seemed ridiculous to me because I knew all I needed to know about this job. And I actually thought, maybe this is a good job, and for a guy with my skills. And we went up to the bar, and it was this beautiful, great big bar in Hermosa Beach, right on this Pier Avenue. And I remember then he introduced me to all the 17 and 18-year-old waitresses while I still had the key to the bar in my hand. And I went, I got this job, and the way I managed that restaurant was I would wait till those damn restaurant customers would leave. And then I'd get all the waitresses up to the bar and drink on the house, right? And the plan was to seduce one of these waitresses. And it would have worked, except around 2 in the morning, they'd go, "Hey, you want to go to my place?" And I'd be like, "Why? We have this bar," And they would be like, "Yeah, but do you want to go to my place?" And I'd be like, "No." And, I think I probably went home with him a couple of times, but I woke up on the bar most of the time. I woke up in the morning with my head on the bar with a splitting headache. The restaurant's a mess. I haven't done the books. And just that day, I remember I came into work one day, and this waitress came up to me, and she said, "I'm pregnant." And I was stunned. And please hear the whole story, but if you lined up the waitresses at Marie Callender's that I could have gotten pregnant and said, "Which one do you want to get pregnant?" I would have said, "Not her." Maybe her. She seems nice. But she, in my mind, and this is in my mind and my perception, she was selfish and self-centered. Right. I'm 31. She's 18. And in my head, it's like, "God, you're so selfish," And it wasn't because of the pregnancy, but right after she told me that, and my life is flashing before my eyes, I got called up to the office, and they fired me. And I was surprised about that. And I was like, "What do you mean?" Because in my head, this job was beneath me. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe I got fired from this lame job, and I got the wrong waitress pregnant, And just my luck. And I remember that I had a car, but I had no idea where it was. So I had to take the bus home from getting fired from this lame job. And I remember I walked across the street. I had snot coming out of my nose. I was crying. I had this Marie Callender's manager badge on. I weighed 108 pounds. I walked up to this bus stop, and oddly enough, just coincidentally, this is a bus stop that's right in front of the Ilano Club in Hermosa Beach. But I don't know what an Ilano Club is. And there's this big civic center building where they teach mentally retarded young adults how to live on their own. right? They teach them living skills so they can live on their own. It's these mildly mentally retarded 20 to 30-somethings. So I walk up to this bus stop, and there's about 10 or 12 mentally retarded people waiting for the bus. And I'm just so embarrassed, and I can't believe I lost this job, and I'm hungover, and I'm crying, and I'm standing on the curb on Pacific Coast Highway, and that bus just can't come fast enough. So I stepped off the curb to see when the bus was going to come, and 10 mentally retarded people yelled, "Don't stand in the street! Don't stand in the street!" And they scared the hell out of me. And I jumped back on the curb because I didn't see the invisible bus that they all saw. And I realized they were teaching me how to wait for a bus, and they were better at it. And I had gone to college, and sadly that was not my bottom. I got on that bus. I know you'd think a guy would give up, but I took that bus home, and went to my apartment, and I tried to kill myself with alcohol and drugs and a gun and everything. Because I couldn't believe it. My mother and father were married for 50 years to each other. And my father treated my mother so beautifully and with such respect. And my mother was this kind, loving woman. And when that girl was 8 months pregnant, I pushed her down a flight of stairs. And I didn't do that because I wanted to hurt her. And I didn't want to hurt that baby. I just didn't have a feeling inside of me for them. And I wanted to get loaded. And they didn't want me to anymore. And I pushed her off my porch, and I closed the door as I heard her fall. And I didn't even look to see what happened. Because alcoholism turned me into an animal. I started out with everything. I had loving parents. I had good direction. I went to this Catholic school. I later found out both my parents worked so they could afford to send us to this school. My father didn't come home till 10 o'clock at night. They gave me every lesson of character and good and evil and a work ethic, and I just pawned it all. I just pawned it all to pay for the party. That's what happened to me. And I just wanted to get loaded. So that's what was happening on May 14th, 1993. And my mother was dying of cancer, and I wouldn't go visit her. I'd call her and think I was going to go visit her when I said, "I'm going to come visit you today, Mom." She lived 2 miles from my house, and as I walked towards the door, I thought, maybe if I just have one drink, I won't be so embarrassed about my situation, and I'll be better. I can speak better to them. I won't, I weighed 108 pounds. Every mirror in my house was covered up with a blanket or a towel because I couldn't stand the sight of myself. And I never made it to the door. I thought I would visit my mom, but I'd go get a drink, and then you know what happens, The sun would go down, and the moon would come up, and then the birds would come out at 6 in the morning, and I'm sitting on my couch, holding my breath for months and months and months. So my brother called me on May 14th, and he said, "Hey, it's Mother's Day tomorrow," and I think it was around that time. He said, "And I'm going to come get you." He said, "I know you're having car trouble." Right? I can't find my car. In an Irish Catholic family, that's car trouble, And he said, "I know you're having car trouble. I'm going to come take you to Mother's Day." And what he was really saying is, I want you to come, And I said, of course. And I didn't sleep that night, and I was getting loaded, and I got a clean shirt on my dirty body, and I waited out in front of my house for my brother to come. And we went off to Mother's Day, and my mother looked pretty ill. I was a little surprised. And my brothers and sister were there. The whole family was there. And the idea was this might be the last Mother's Day. And I can't make sense if my life depended on it. I just started talking, thinking if I say enough words, they won't notice that I'm dying. And I just started babbling, and they turned around and they locked me out of the circle of conversation, and they didn't look at me. And I've had so many moments of bitter and incomprehensible demoralization behind alcoholism. I've let things be done to me that I never thought I'd let be done to me. And I've done things to other people that I never thought I'd do behind drugs and alcohol. But that moment when my mother and father and brothers and sisters turned away from me, I don't know why, but that was the worst moment of my life. It was the loneliest moment of my life. I felt like I had been sent to live on Mars. I don't know why. I'm just telling you I remember it. So we left. My brother drove me home, and on the way home we got in a huge fight. I don't know what it was about. We got in a big fight. It wasn't about my drinking. I remember that. I got out of his car and I slammed his door and I ran into my apartment and I paced around my apartment because I was waiting for him to go home so I could call him up and keep going with this fight. I had the moral higher ground somehow. And I called him up and I just started screaming at him. And I'm yelling at him and yelling at him. And he's quiet, totally quiet. And at the end of my tirade, he paused for a minute, and I was quiet, and he said, "You know, Matthew, I think you may have a problem with alcoholism." And I look at this moment as the moment where God's grace came into my life, and I really mean that with all my heart. This was a divine intervention, because for some reason, I said to him, "Of course I do." And people had been saying to me, "You got to stop drinking, you got a drinking problem, you're a drug addict," for years and years, and I'd be like, "No, man, you're crazy. I know what that looks like. My brother lived in his car. I'm successful." And here my brother said this to me, and I remember exactly what the carpet looked like. I remember the light coming through the blinds because I said, "Of course I do." I did the first step. I admitted it. I didn't know I was doing the first step. And then my brother said something really funny. He said, "Don't go anywhere. I'm going to come over." Now, I don't know where he thought I was going, but I didn't go anywhere. I lived right next door to a liquor store. And I'd already changed into remember we used to wear those hospital pants? Remember those? I had one pair of those. I thought they were I wore them all the time. They could actually walk across the room to me on their own because I never washed them. No one was visiting. So I'm wearing my hospital pants, and he's on the phone going, "Don't go anywhere." I'm like, "Yeah, that's all right." And he comes over. And I thought he was going to come over and kick my ass. I thought he'd start hitting me and beat me up and that I would never drink again. And the reason I thought that, I had a couple of reasons. One is that comes sometimes as how he and I handle things. He was a great brother, but, he's my older brother, and sometimes he throttled me when I was out of line. And also, I've described to you a very little bit about what it was like in my life, a very tip of the iceberg. But it was so much worse inside me. It was a moonscape outside of me, but it was 100,000 times uglier inside of me. And I kind of hoped he would beat me up. I kind of hoped somebody would finally treat me the way I felt I deserved to be treated. I had all this arrogance and pride, but I thought I was worthless. And he came over and he walked into my apartment and he said, "Let's go to the beach." And we walked down to the beach, which was right in front of my apartment. I never went outside and looked at it. I never looked at it. And we walked down to the lifeguard stand, and he started talking to me about how he felt when Mom and Dad kicked him out of the house. And he started talking to me about how he felt when his wife and son said, "We never, ever want to see you again. Please don't come back here." And he started talking to me about how he felt when he lived in his car and he couldn't stop drinking. And he started describing exactly how I felt. And I couldn't believe it. I was so surprised because I didn't think anybody in the world knew how I felt sitting on that lifeguard stand. And the last person I would have expected is my brother. I don't know why. He was sober. But I just never would have gone to him. And I was so disarmed by that. And I'd like to tell you I saw the light and threw up my hands and decided to go to AA. But the truth is I ran out of cigarettes. And I realized he was going to keep talking. And I was the kind of guy at that time that needed something all the time. And I saw that I was on my last cigarette, and I put my hand up and said, "You know what? Okay, I'll go to AA. You're right." And then my old Irish Catholic sarcastic brother came back into him, and he looked at me, and he laughed right in my face. He goes, "Dude, AA, you're not going to AA. You're going to a hospital." And I looked right at him, and totally seriously, I said, "Oh, man, I can't do that. I'm busy." And I thought I was busy, I believed I was busy. And I'm like, and I go, "How long?" He goes, 30 days. I'm like, "Oh, no, I can't leave all this for 30 days. Who's not going to pay the bills? I'm the guy not paying the bills right now. Who's not going to answer the phone? I'm the guy who doesn't answer the phone at that apartment." And I don't know what I was thinking, but he ignored that. And we went up to my apartment, and on May 16th, I was scheduled to go to the hospital, And I'd been up all night getting ready for rehab. Like a good, I don't want to think I'm not trying. And I wanted to show him the real me. And I wake up passed out on my couch, and the phone's ringing. I think it's him. I pick up the phone, and they go, "Hey, where you been, man? Your daughter was born today." I said, "What?" And they said, "Yeah, we've been looking all over for you. Can you come to the hospital?" I said, "Absolutely." And I went outside and started looking for my car. And I'm looking all over for my car. I mean, and it's a beach city. It's hard to keep a parking place. And I finally find my car. It's got tons of parking tickets on it. And I get in my car. And just to tell you, this later occurred to me, how selfish and self-centered I was. I got in my car, and I went to the hospital where I was born. Because that's where babies come from, right? You know, all humanity flows from Little Company of Mary, right? And oddly enough, she was not there. They're like, "Who? What?" And then they looked at me and go, "You should go to the 3rd floor, sir." You know, but Anna had told me 100 times where this baby was going to be born. I just didn't listen to her. I know where babies are born. I was born, you know. And so I got in my car. I remembered where it was. I went to the right hospital. I went up to the maternity ward. I walked into that room, and Anna smiled at me and was pleased to see me. And it was humiliating. And she came towards me with this unbelievable, beautiful thing and handed Phoebe Rose to me. And I looked at her, and she was purity, and I was ugliness. It was that plain. I was completely full of self-loathing. I wanted to be sick when I held her because she was so perfect. And I looked at Anna, and I looked at Phoebe. I was there for maybe 3 minutes. And I thought to myself, I said a little prayer. I said, "God, I hope I never see these 2 people again. Because I'll kill this baby, and I won't even know I did it. I almost did it already, you know." And she stunned me. And I handed her back to Anna, and I said, "Everything's going to be fine." I lied, you know. And I went back out there, and I got to my apartment, and my brother's sitting on his car going, "Where the hell have you been?" I said, "Well, my daughter was born today." And he said, "Wow." He didn't think that was so great. And we got in his car and we went to a hospital. And I remember nothing about that hospital. I remember I gained 47 pounds. That's all I know. I know we did stuff. But, you know, I heard an old-timer. I always wondered why I can't remember much of that hospital. And this old-timer once said something at our meeting. He said, "You know, you come in here at 90 miles an hour, man. You're going to skid for a while." So I skidded right through the hospital. And my brother took me home. And I want to just pause for a second and point something out about this. I think it's very important to me. You know, my brother had a lot of practice thumping me on the chest and calling me stupid. My brother had a lot of practice talking down to me. He was my older brother by 7 years. And that's just how it was. And he did not do that on that lifeguard stand. What my brother did is what's outlined in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous in the chapter called Working with Others. He did it exactly like it says in that chapter. He told me a little bit about his own story to win my confidence, and it worked perfectly. And then he encouraged me to tell him what was going on with me, and it worked perfectly. And I've been to a lot of AA meetings, and I hear a lot of people say, "My sponsor thumped me on the chest and called me stupid." And I want to say out loud from this podium, that is not Alcoholics Anonymous, and it never has been. It says all over that book, attraction rather than promotion. Never talk down to an alcoholic. And all I know is my experience. But if my brother had thumped me on the chest and called me stupid, if my brother had beaten me up like I wanted to, I would be dead today. You don't get to be 108 pounds for very long. And he very artfully and very skillfully 12-stepped me. And thank God he read that book, because he saved my life. And he drove me home from that hospital, pushed me out of my car and said, "Go to a meeting." And I thought, go to a meeting? I got 30 days of sobriety. I got a month-old baby. I got a mom who's dying of cancer. I owe everybody money. I got a lot of things to do. I can't really go to a meeting. You know, that was my attitude. And I walked up to my apartment and I opened the door and somebody handed me a beer. Actually, it wasn't a beer. It was a Coors. And they put this Coors on my hand. That's not a beer. It's certainly not I'm going to throw away 30 days on this beer. And I put my hand out. Guy put a beer in my hand. And I looked around my apartment, and they were smoking pot in my living room, and they were snorting cocaine off my glass table, and all my favorite Olympic events. And I walked backwards out of that thing, and I put that beer down, and I ran to a phone booth, and I called Alcoholics Anonymous. Because all I had in the world at that moment was 30 days of sobriety. I had nothing else. I had no character. I had nothing inside me. No one cared about me. No one wanted to be around me. I owed everybody money. I had warrants out for my arrest. I had a baby. I had nothing but that 30 days. And I called AA, and the guy said, there's a meeting right across the street from the phone booth you're talking to me from. And I didn't want to go. Yeah, but is there another one like later? Or... You know how it is. But, because I was so nervous, I was so nervous. And I walked across the street and I went into this room, and it was a great big meeting. It's a meeting that's not there anymore. It was called Stompers. It's a great big speaker meeting, like 300 people every week. And I went and sat down in the middle, and I was so nervous, I didn't know anybody. And I remember the speaker got up there, and he was wearing a suit, and he got up and put his hands on the podium. I'll never forget what he said. He said, wah, 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 wah. And you guys are all laughing and nodding, and I'm like, I am so screwed, because my head was going really loud, and I couldn't hear him. And they were talking about happiness and joy and good things. And I remember he pointed to the steps, and he said, these are tools for living. So I thought, okay, I'll read those. And I'm reading them, and I'm going, God, I got tax issues. Where's the tax step? I'm probably going to jail soon. Where's the lawyer up step? And I got diaper issues now. And I mean, all these, like, where are the issues addressed? And fortunately, a friend of my brother's was there, and he picked me up at the meeting. He said, let me take you to your house. And I go, I don't think I have a house. And we went to my parents' house. And like all tough guys, I moved in with my mom and my dad. And who here is in their first year of sobriety? Can you raise your hand? All right, welcome to AA. I want to tell you, and I want you to be very clear, I'm telling you this as a person with experience, I'm not talking down to you. Your perspective of reality in your first year of sobriety may not be related to reality at all. And I want to give you an example from my own experience. Like, when I moved in with my mom and my dad, I thought this is possibly the worst thing that's ever happened. My parents are really old. My dad and mom at that time were married for about 43 years. And my mother's dying of cancer. And their grown son, who had a pretty promising career and did well in college, is moving in their house with an illegitimate child across town. I thought it was so humiliating for them. And I thought it was so humiliating for me. I thought it was possibly the worst situation ever. But what the reality was my mom and dad were married forever, and their youngest boy, the one person they were worried about, moved in with them in the worst time of their lives and went to AA meetings and got a job and sat there at breakfast and made conversation. It was absolutely perfect. I just didn't know it. It was absolutely perfect. And it was actually one of the happiest times of my life. I held my father when he cried at night because my mom was going to die. The strongest man I ever met cried in my arms. It was unbelievable. I would never trade that for anything. And I thought it was the worst thing. I just didn't know. So I really want to tell you about recovery. Some really important stuff happened to me in AA. And I never am able to talk about it. The thing about Alcoholics Anonymous is it's so interior. And it's such a spiritual, subtle, uncommunicable thing. You cannot talk about it. That we're forced to tell our stories. But I can tell you right now, I'm going to fail. But I'll tell you, I got a sponsor, like my third meeting. I remember I got up first thing in the morning from my parents' house and went to an early morning meeting. I came home and I went to a lunchtime meeting. I saw a guy at that meeting laugh with comfort. He laughed and he looked very comfortable. And I went back that night to a Tuesday night step study, and he was there. And I walked across the room and I felt like it was 1,000 miles. And I thought you were all staring at me. And I walked up to this guy and I said, will you sponsor me? And he looked at me, and I'll never forget this. He goes, he didn't say, yes, my name's John, get a big book, we're going to conquer alcoholism. He said, do you have a job? And I thought that was the weirdest question. I said, no, I don't have a job. And then he said, oh, I get a job. And then I asked him a stupid question. I go, well, what kind of job should I get? Like he was my career counselor, and he looked at me and goes, yeah, the kind with a paycheck. And, and looking back, that was great direction. It kind of broadened the field. And He didn't care about my skill set, which was medium lead guitar and crappy restaurant manager. So I got a job from midnight to 4 in the morning, stacking newspapers at the Daily Breeze, a local newspaper. And you know what? From the minute I got that job, I didn't think it was beneath me. It's amazing what a little bit of time can do for you. I had a little bit of sobriety, and I was so grateful that somebody took a chance on me. And I stacked newspapers, and I'd say the Serenity Prayer at my break time and smoke Camel no filter. So I was still trying to die. And I just did that job, and I went to meetings in the morning. I went to meetings at noon, and my sponsor did this great thing. He read the big book with me. He had me read it, and then we'd come to his house, and we'd read the part that I read with him. And then when we got to steps, we would work the steps. And, somewhere in that time, early in my sobriety, an important thing happened to me. I was walking with him into this meeting. I think I was like 60 days sober. And I said, I can't believe how much I love Phoebe. I didn't think I could love anybody the way I love this little girl, and I think I love her more than I love myself. And he just kept walking. He didn't even stop. And we walk into the meeting, and he sits down in his regular chair, and I sit down, and I'm looking at him thinking, maybe he didn't hear me. And after the meeting, I'm jogging along beside him going, I was trying to talk to you about something before the meeting, and, I just want to tell you, I thought being a father was the worst thing ever, but, I'm in AA, I'm a sober dad, it's probably the best thing, and I'm looking at him, and I go, I just really love this girl, and he turns around on me, and he puts his hand up in my face, he goes, just stop for a second. How much child support do you pay? And I said, man, I work at the Daily Breeze from midnight to 4 in the morning, and I live with my parents, and I'm going to probably live with them forever because I don't make any money, and I can't keep this car running, and I'm blah, blah, blah. And he looks at me and goes, yeah, no, I know. How much child support do you pay? And I said, well, I don't pay any. And he goes, then you're kind of full of it, huh? And I said, what are you talking about? He said, this is a program of action, Matthew. This isn't a program of talk. He said, why don't you quit telling me how much you love your daughter and just show me. Then you won't have to ever tell me again. And my face went red, and I was embarrassed, and I was angry, and I went back to my old bedroom at my parents' house, and I paced around because clearly I had to find another sponsor. This guy's an idiot, and he's not sensitive, and you know what? He did not thump me on the chest and call me stupid. He didn't do that. He told me very calmly, "You're kind of full of it. You're talking about something and you're not doing it." And instead of calling him up, I called up Anna, that waitress at Marie Callender's, who turns out was the exact right waitress to get pregnant at Marie Callender's. She's an amazing mom. She's selfless. Phoebe's 16 years old now, and she's in an accelerated program at school. She's talented. She's beautiful. And I didn't do that. Anna did that. I just didn't know. I couldn't see it. So I called up Anna and said, hey, I should give you some money, right? And she goes, that would be great. And I said, well, I work at the Daily Breeze and I'm living with Mom and Dad right now. And I said, how much do you want? And she's so smart. She goes, oh, no, let's not do that. She said, why don't I take a percentage of your paycheck? I don't need an amount. And I thought, cool, right? Because I thought, what? She's so smart. And I said, all right, how much do you want? And she could have said, I want 99% of your paycheck because I made nothing, And she said, I want, this amount. And it was totally reasonable. And every 2 weeks I would run over there and I'd pay that money. Every 2 weeks. And I did that for 2 reasons. And none of them had to do with being a good parent. It's just the truth. There were 2 reasons I paid that money. One was I'd never wanted to drink again. And my sponsor had made this weird correlation between drinking and doing this. And the second one was I loved being with Phoebe. She was the only spiritual experience I had for a year, was being in her presence. And I felt like if I paid the money, I kind of paid my way. And I could stay and not feel self-conscious, So I paid the money so I could play with Phoebe. Now, Anna wasn't keeping Phoebe from me. I just had this self-consciousness about me. So I got in there and I paid the money every 2 weeks. And then it got really weird because 6 months into doing this, I walk into an AA meeting full of people like you, and you guys didn't stand up and applaud. And I started getting the grapevine because I was waiting for the article, where's Matthew pays child support, he's a hell of a guy article, And I'm not kidding, It's like I was thinking, because I want a parade for doing the right thing. I can sort of feel your laughter. You're kind of laughing at me. And That's not all right. So I'm going to make it sort of bring it home for you. Remember when you're like 6 months sober and you get your license reinstated and you get insurance and you go up to your buddy in AA and you go, hey, I got my driver's license. And they go, hey, man, you're 40. You should have a driver's license, you know. And you're like, wah, 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 you know. It's like, no, but I got a driver's license. So I wanted a parade, right? But after about a year, what became the most important part is I didn't tell anybody, and I still did it. Nobody knew, and I still did it every 2 weeks. And Anna was cool. I could take Phoebe anywhere I wanted, anytime I wanted. And I still did it. And after about a year, Anna was getting ready to go to college. And I remember sitting on the floor of her bedroom at her parents' house, playing with Phoebe, thinking, God, Phoebe, I'm going to take you to kindergarten. That's awesome. I'm going to take you to like your first day of first grade. It like dawned on me, you know. I'm going to take you to high school. I'm going to drive you to dances. I'm going to take you to the prom and drop you off. I'm going to try to pay for college. I'm going to know you, darling, for the rest of your life. A year ago, I wanted her to never see me again. I wanted her, for her own good, to never see me again. And a year later, doing action in AA, like paying money and going to meetings and doing the steps, and doing a fifth step, and realizing my part in things, I became a little bit cleaner inside. Not a lot, just a little bit. And I couldn't wait to spend the rest of my life with her. And I thought it was an honor. That's what happens here. You know, I got a job. I want to tell you about how I got this job. My sponsor, he said a funny thing. Well, about that amends, I want to say something. It's like, you know, I know paying child support is not an amends. I've made all my amends. I've paid all the money back. I owed thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. I owed one guy $15,000, and when I wrote him on my H-step, it looked like $10 million, you know? I wrote his name and I won $15,000, and it just looked like $10 million because I didn't have it. And I couldn't imagine paying a guy back $15,000. I had lots of other people I owed $600 and $1,000, but this one was huge. So I went to my sponsor and said, I don't think I can do that. And he said, why not? And I said, well, I don't have $15,000, and I live with my mom and dad, and I have this baby, and, you know, I'm trying to cover everything. And he said, well, Matthew, you don't have to hand the guy a briefcase for $15,000. He said, where does he live? And I said, well, he moved to Mexico City. And he said, well, write him a check. How much can you afford? And I said, really? I can afford $10. He said, send him a check for $10 and write him a letter. And before you send that letter, read it to me. So I read him this amends letter. And it was long because I really, really screwed this guy. And he was a good guy. And my sponsor changed a couple things. And I put the $10 and I sent it. And every paycheck, I sent, or every month, I didn't do it every paycheck, I sent $10. I owed him $15,000. It felt like I was walking up to an empty swimming pool with an eyedropper and going, someday I will swim, you know. And I had no faith that I was ever going to swim, you know. And you know, because the sun evaporates, it's like not working out. And so $10, $10. And then I got better jobs. Who knew? You go to work every day, you get better jobs. And then I started giving them $20, and sometimes I sent them $100, and sometimes I sent them $50. But I always wrote it down in a little book. And sometimes I didn't send them anything, so there was nothing in the book, and I'd forget and go, oh crap, you know, and send them the next month. Well, I paid the guy back $7,000. It took me almost 7 years, and it's such a funny AA story. He moved back into the country. And he called me up one day and he said, hey, stop sending me those checks. And I said, why would I do that? And I paid you less than half. And he didn't know, he had no idea how much I paid him. And he said, well, whatever. He said, you have become a man that I didn't know you were. He said, I always thought you were a great guy. And I don't know what you're doing over there in AA, but you have paid me back. And I made the mistake of calling my sponsor. Doug knows my sponsor. To brag that I had paid all the money back, right? And my sponsor was so funny. I'm never going to be this cool as a sponsor. He goes, really? Wow, really? And I said, yeah. And he said, that's that guy you paid $10 a month to when you live with your mom and your dad. I said, absolutely. He said, wow, that's weird. He said, now, you know, you got a great life. He said, hey, Matthew, you want to stop doing what's working? That's cool. I was like, this guy is a bad financial advisor, you know. Why do I call him? And so I called Larry back and said, I'm sorry, I've got to pay the money. And my father passed away. My mother died in my arms. My mother died in my arms. And I was a son. I wasn't an alcoholic lost. I was a son. And you guys gave me that. And my father followed her. He died of a broken heart. He died in my arms. And he didn't die in my arms. He died right in front of me. I was standing right there. And he left me some money. And I knew what to do. I wrote a check for $8,000. And I put it in a FedEx envelope. And I sent it to Larry. And Larry called me up. And this is a true story. Larry called me up and he said, Matthew, you are not going to believe this. He said, I'm looking at my wife. We're talking about our future. We just found out we're going to have another baby. And we're trying to buy a house in this neighborhood we live in. But we were just about $8,000 short of a down payment. And the FedEx man came. And he said, and your check is here. So the flake, the loser, the animal, got to help the guy with perfect credit buy a house with his own money. Whatever. But, my sponsor, I told that story at my home group, and my sponsor goes, with his own money? My sponsor knows how to F up a good story, I'm like, yeah, that's true, but that's not my white horse just fell out from under me. And but you know what? The reason I tell you that story is because I don't know if I would have had a drink again. I don't know if I hadn't told my sponsor the debt was forgiven. If I just said, okay, Larry, I won't send you any more checks. I have no way of knowing if I would have had a drink again. But I know exactly that I wouldn't feel this way. And I wouldn't live this way. And I'd pay $8,000 a week for this. I'd pay for the rest of my life for what I got inside me. I am clean inside. I like my own company. And I never had that before. When people come to me with their 8-step list, this happens all the time, and they put themselves, I'm going to put myself at the top, because clearly I hurt myself the worst. Have anybody else heard this? And you look and go, and I want to say so many one-liners and zingers, but what I say every time is, you know what, man? Maybe if you put yourself on the bottom, and you do all those other amends, it won't be necessary anymore to make amends to yourself. Maybe that will be done. It's all amends to yourself. They're all amends. I pawned everything to pay for the party. I had to go back to the pawn shop and make payments to get that stuff back. And I got it back. Another important thing that happened to me in my sobriety was the 11th step. I did not like the 11th step. I was raised by the witches of God. I was raised by nuns. And they're scary. And they keep them all off by themselves. And there's a reason for that. I have nothing bad to say about the Catholic Church. I can tell you I had a very bad experience with Catholic school. And when I looked at the 11th step and it said only for knowledge of God's will for me and the power to carry that out, I got panic-stricken. I really did. I thought, I don't know what God's will for me. All I know is God hates my guts. Because the nuns told me things like, if you're thinking about sex, you're going to hell. I was 14 years old. I had hormones racing through me. I pretty much, after a couple of weeks of trying not to think about sex, accepted hell. Maybe it's not so bad. And, I make jokes about it, but my point is I tried to be good the way they said good looked, and I never could do it. I tried with all my heart. I wanted to be a good boy, and I failed and failed and failed. So what built up in me at that Catholic school was God must think I'm disgusting. And then I started drinking and gave him every reason to think I was disgusting. So when I saw that, I went, uh-oh. And I went to my sponsor and said, I got a question about this thing. How do I know God's will for me? Because it seems a little ambiguous. And I don't really want to pray to ask him because I don't think God talks to me. So I was really kind of worried, And he could see I was tense. And he didn't answer me right away. He was very cool about it. He said, let's just think about that. Don't worry about it. Just keep going to meetings. Keep doing what you're doing. You got some more 9-step stuff. Just do what you're doing. So I said, okay. A couple of weeks later, I said, it's bugging me. I hear about all these meditation things and stuff. And he said, all right, I thought about it. He said, you know what, Matthew? I think it's like this. He said, I think you're making it way too complicated. He said, I think if a bill comes in the mail and says, pay this amount, God's saying, pay that amount. If the alarm clock goes off, God's saying, hey, get up. If the baby's diaper needs changing, God's saying, time to change the baby. He said, why don't you do the next indicated thing? And you might be comfortable in knowing that that's probably God's will. And it sounds so simple, but it changed my life. It really literally changed my life because I went out the door with confidence. I went to work with confidence. If I just do this, I'm okay. I'm doing what God's will is. And you may say, well, how can you not do the next indicated thing? I'll tell you what. I could do my grandiose plan. Like when my mom was dying right in front of me, I wanted to bring her a string quartet, and I wanted to have musical play. I had no money, and I wanted to hire these musicians I knew to make her feel better. I wanted to bring her food from her favorite restaurant. And my sponsor said, dude, you are so grandiose. Just go sit by her hospital bed 20 minutes longer than it's comfortable for you. That's a son. Do that. And my mom was in a hospital bed in my father's living room. It was very uncomfortable. And I did that. And I'm so glad I did that. But I started doing the next indicated thing. And I got this job. I'd love to tell you this. I have to tell you how I got this job. He said, it's AA, man. I was telling my sponsor, I'm praying that prayer, relieve me of the bondage of self that I can better do your will. And my sponsor said, that's great. Prayer is great, Matthew. He said, but what you really want to do is action. Why don't you help God out, relieving you of the bondage of self? I'm like, how do I do that? And he said, why don't you do stuff for people and don't tell anybody? Why don't you try to do something good and get away with it? That's how you do it, action. So right after this conversation, we walked into the men's stag and we asked for people from out of town. And this guy raised his hand and said, my name's Kevin, I'm visiting from Australia, and I'm going to be here once a month. I'd love to be part of your meeting. And I went, I want to remember Kevin's name. That will be my great altruistic act. And I will be relieved of the bondage of self and all will be well, right? And I'm not kidding. That was all. I was like, that's it. That's the thing. And a month later, I'd forgotten all about Kevin, right? And I'm talking to my boys, and in walks this guy, and I look around, and it was like a high school dance. I ran across the room. I'm going to say hi to Kevin, And I get across the room, and I walk up to him, and I said, Kevin, welcome back to the greatest meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in the world. And he looked at me, and he said, how did you remember my name? Or he said, how do you know my name? And I said, you said it a month ago, and you said you were visiting. I thought it must be hard visiting from other countries, and this is a great meeting, and I just want you to know you can feel welcome here. He said, wow, that really impresses me. He says, what do you do for a living? I said, well, I stack newspapers at the loading dock at the Daily Breeze. And I'm very fulfilled. And he said, well, come outside and talk to me. So I went outside, and he gave me his card. And he was vice president of this big international airline. And he said, come to my office and bring your DMV and wear a suit. Come tomorrow. I said, all right. So I put on my newcomer suit, right? I had a black suit with brown hush puppy shoes because I didn't have any black shoes. And I was really nervous about my shoes. And I brought my DMV, which was like thicker than a phone book, and all the DUI. I got arrested 3 times for one DUI. That's how lame I am. And I just couldn't quite get that crap together. And I got to the office, and I walk in, and he opens the door, and he looks down at my shoes, and he starts laughing. So now I'm really uncomfortable, because he's in AA, right? And he's like, perfect. And he introduces me to this amazing, beautiful Hawaiian girl who's the human resources person. And she was kind. She didn't look at my shoes. And we go into her office, and she's flipping through my application in the DMV report and looking at my shoes and looking at me and looking at the report. And she goes, hold on just a second. And she goes into the office right behind me, and I hear through the wall him yell at her, he's not going to fly the goddamn planes. He's going to put people on them. You got to love AA, man. So she comes back in, and now she's nervous, and I'm completely relaxed. And she goes, "We're going to hire you," and I'm like, "Damn right, and you're lucky to have me." It was so funny. Anyway, I got this job, and it was a great job, and I got to go to the airport every day. And the reason I tell that story is because I did not raise my hand at a meeting and say, I have a burning desire, I need a job. I tried to do a little tiny thing for God. I tried to do a little tiny thing for God, and God came running at me. It said, "Here you go. Here you go, man." And it was wonderful. I got to buy a guitar on my way to work. I was making enough money to pay child support, pay all those amends checks, start saving to move out, and I got to buy a guitar. And I had sold all my guitars, and it broke my heart when I did that. I sold them for drugs, and the things that I loved most in the world. And I bought this beautiful guitar on the way to work, and I went into my office, and nobody at work trusted me because I didn't drink, and the vice president hired me. So they're like, that guy's a mole, you know. And also, I blew it one day at work. I was standing at the computer checking somebody in, and this guy next to me goes, "This job is hell." And I go, "Oh, no, man. This isn't hell. I have been to hell. This is awesome." So it got around not to trust the new freak guy who was there. But I loved that job. I loved it. I liked talking to people. They're happy. They're going on vacation. And I'm standing there with this guitar, and I'm dying to show somebody. I look around the office, and I'm not the cool guy at work. I got no one to show. And I've been the cool guy at work before, and I always got fired. So it was all right with me, and I just put it in my locker. And on my way out that night, it was 10:30, and at LAX, the employees take what's called the D bus to the D parking lot. So I'm standing by the D bus parking lot with my guitar and my brand new Taylor Dan Crary acoustic guitar. Great guitar. If you play guitar, you're jealous of me now. And I'm okay with that. And I'm standing there with this guitar, and I'm dying to show somebody, and this woman walks up next to me from British Airways, and I turn to her and go, "Hey, can I show you my new guitar?" And she looks right at me, and she goes, "I didn't look at strange men's guitar." And then she looked straight ahead. And I thought, wow, that's weird. And the bus comes, and unfortunately for her, the bus was full. So we got on the bus, and we're pressed against each other. We got a guitar between us, but we're right here. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, calm down. I made her uncomfortable. So she's reading this book, Surprised by Joy by C.S. Lewis. And I said, oh, I read that book. And she said, well, cut to the chase. Do you believe in God? And I almost spit on her because I went, God save my life! And all the blood just drained out of her face. And I thought, God, Matthew, wow, you're making her really uncomfortable. So I said, I don't know. What do you think? And she said, well, I'm on the fence, really. That's why I'm reading all these books and I'm taking this class. And I noticed while we were talking, and she was just lovely. It was just beautiful. And I'm feeling really comfortable. And we're talking about God, about whether we believe in God. And I'm not talking about AA. I totally shut down the Matthew Be Yourself program. And we talked, and it was very comfortable. And we got off the bus. And as we got off the bus, I said, hey, why don't we forget about this car? Would you like to have dinner with me? And she looked at me and said, no. She said, oh, that's it, right. Look at my guitar. I've read that book. I should be able to wait for the bus. You're hitting on I'm like, wow. And she storms off, right? And I went to my car, and I knew that I had grown spiritually because I went to work the next day, and I didn't tell anybody she was a lesbian. Right? I mean, that's like nobody's business. I'm okay, you're okay, we're okay. And I'm not kidding. I'm sorry, but what I mean is, I had a spiritual awakening as a result of the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I liked me. And I didn't have to say something about somebody else who rejected me, and I was pretty clear that I had made her uncomfortable through things that I had said. I had said the wrong things, purely innocently and by accident, but it was an unfortunate event, and it had nothing to do with the quality of person she was. And by the way, I am fine with lesbians. I had a lesbian. I told this story at a meeting years ago, and this lesbian comes up and goes, I'm a lesbian. I said, that's great. She said, you know how I know I'm a lesbian? I said, no, how do you know? And she goes, I'm not attracted to you. So, helping women around AA discover their sexuality. It's my specialty. But anyway, I went to work the next day, and I didn't think about it. I really didn't. I worked my job, and I walked up to that bus stop the next day, and she was standing there. And I thought, uh-oh. And so I turned, and I looked straight ahead and thought, I don't have a guitar. Maybe she won't recognize me. And she tapped me on the shoulder, and she said, I've been thinking, and I think maybe I was rude to you last night, in this beautiful British accent. And she said, would you miss this bus and have coffee with me inside? I said, absolutely. And we've been married for 13 years. That's right, I converted a lesbian. Miracles happen in Alcoholics Anonymous. No, you might be listening to this story going, what has this got to do with AA? And I want to tell you, this has everything to do with Alcoholics Anonymous. My wife is the great gift of my sobriety. She is the great gift of my sobriety. I told my sponsor before we got married, I go, she's not blonde, she's not anorexic, she's not addicted to heroin, she's really not my type. And he said, no, I know, but I think maybe you've changed and you've attracted somebody better. And that was true. My wife is confident, she's intelligent, she's self-sufficient, and after 13 years of marriage, I get thrilled sitting next to her. I've never lied to my wife. I can look you all in the eye and say that. And there isn't a woman I've dated that I haven't lied to. Because I was never enough. I had to make something up. But I'm enough now. That's spiritual awakening. I'm totally okay with me. And she's all right. She doesn't need me. I always needed you to need me. Or I didn't think you loved me. And when I married that woman, we got married in Crystal Lake, Illinois, because my wife, the kind of person she is, she said, your mom's not going to live much longer. She's from Chicago. You have that house in Crystal Lake. Why don't we get her to go home? Why don't we have you get married on the lawn of that house? That's how she is. And we got married in this big lawn in this house in Crystal Lake, and there's a little pier there. And before she came down those steps and walked across that lawn to marry me, I walked out on that pier and I looked up at the clouds and I said, thank you, God. Thank you, God, that this is the next indicated thing to do today. Because the next indicated thing isn't always a dirty diaper and an alarm clock and a bill. Sometimes the next indicated thing makes your heart blow up in your chest with joy. And I've had that over and over in here. I go to these panels in God knows where, and I don't know why, until I'm driving home and I'm filled with the Holy Spirit. I walk into my house and my kids look better when I do service work. I had 2 kids with Philippa, and with both of them, I was in the car with her and I went to the right hospital. It's a totally different experience. And those are moments where your heart blows up in your chest. Those are moments of great joy. Now, I want to be honest with you, and I'm going to talk for just a few more minutes. But I don't like it when speakers come up to the podium and say, I came to AA, I worked the steps, and sunshine started coming out of my ass. Because I just have not seen that in Alcoholics Anonymous. I have looked. You have to use 2 mirrors. It's very complicated. What I'm trying to say is, life has happened to me. My parents died when I was sober. Things happen in AA. I've had wonderful, wonderful moments of sublime. I've had horrible, horrible moments of fear. And I want to tell you that when we were married for 6 years, so 7 years ago, I walked in my house and I found my wife on the floor. And she had a massive stroke. And ever since that day, my wife has been brain damaged and paralyzed. And I saw her on the ground, and I looked down at her, and I ran up to her, and I could see she had a stroke. Her face was all distorted. And I said, I'm going to call an ambulance. And I called an ambulance, and I sat with her, and the room just went into slow motion. I don't know what happened to my children. I walked out the door and got in that ambulance with my wife, the love of my life. I got in that ambulance, and on the way to the hospital, I called my sponsor, and I called my sister. My parents were dead. And I called her parents in the United Kingdom, in England. And I got to the hospital, and they looked at her, and they said, we need a helicopter. And I live in a big city. I live in Long Beach. We have 2 huge hospitals. And they landed a helicopter on Catella Avenue, the street that Disneyland's on, and blocked it off to fly my wife to UC Irvine because they thought she wasn't going to live. And I flew in this helicopter. So I went to one hospital. I flew to another hospital. Night fell. They were going to do this great operation on her, and it failed miserably. They couldn't do it because of the nature of her stroke. She tore her carotid artery. And I walked out of that ICU, lost and alone, at 1 o'clock in the morning. And it was full of people from Alcoholics Anonymous. The waiting room was full. They had found me. I went from one hospital to another in a helicopter. And they figured it out. And the message was really clear. The message was, Matthew, you're not going to be alone through this. We're going to do this with you. And I had never felt so alone in my life. Now, I want to return the favor to John and tell him about a spiritual experience I had in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I don't think we should ever shy away from talking about God here. So it was a weird situation. When my wife had that stroke, I had just gotten a job I had been trying to get. I'm a drug dealer. I'm a pharmaceutical salesman. I'm getting my money back. And I just gotten this job, and I had to go to training in Chicago in 10 days. And my wife's in ICU, and I'm like, forgot all about it. I'm just laying there in ICU, holding her, listening to doctors, getting confused, freaking out. And I go to my sponsor and go, man, I got to go to Chicago in like 3 days now. I guess I should call and tell him I can't go. And he goes, why can't you go? I said, well, my wife's in ICU. And he said, why don't you go be a worker among workers? He said, look, half of Alcoholics Anonymous is living at that hospital. He said, why don't you go to Chicago and not tell anybody there that your wife had a stroke a week ago? And I looked at him and thought, you are insane, But what came out of my mouth was, yeah, okay. Because he always told me the truth. And I thought, this must be right. It feels absolutely wrong to do this. And I thought about it for 3 days, and I went back and forth, but I never called him and told him. So I got on that plane with my wife's blessing. When my in-laws thought I was nuts. But I went to Chicago, and I worked and I worked and I worked like my life depended on it because we just lost half our income. And I called my wife every 3 hours, every time I had a break. And my cell phone had 10 and 15 messages every 3 hours. No exaggeration from you guys. I looked at your wife today. She looks really good, man. I fed your kids. I hope you're not upset, but we wrapped the Christmas presents we found in the closet. We put up your Christmas lights. How could I drink? I was 3,000 miles from home in a strange place, and I couldn't drink because I would have had to push you all out of my way to get to the sports bar where everybody else was going. And I went up to my room and I prayed for my wife. I just prayed that she lived. And I prayed, and I used to fall asleep with my clothes on because I had this weird superstition that if I put my pajamas on, my wife would die. I don't know why. I just thought that. So one weekend I realized I could get home on the airline and no one would know at work. I could go to the airport. I have all sorts of friends at airlines. Arranged the ticket. I flew with no luggage, clothes off my back, went straight to the hospital. I hadn't seen my wife for 2 weeks. I talked to her 4 or 5 times a day on the phone. And I go into the hospital room, and she looks terrible. She looked so sick and she couldn't move at all. She didn't know who people were. She knew who I was, but I was so surprised because I'd made her better in my head. I'd made her better. And I laid down next to her in that hospital bed, and I put my arms around her, and I fell asleep. And at like 4:30 in the morning, I woke bolt upright, fully aware of what faced me. I had a paralyzed wife. I had a 1-year-old, I had a 3-year-old, and I had a 7-year-old. I had a new job that I was quickly realizing was way over my head, and my wife was never going to be the same ever again. And I looked at her, and I got out of bed, and I was so afraid. I hadn't had this kind of fear of sober ever. And the nurses left me these little soaps and shampoos and stuff. They knew I was coming, and I was the guy who was always on the phone. And I got that stuff, and I gathered it up, and I walked down the hall to the showers. And every step, I thought, I'm not going to be able to do this. I can't make the walk. I'm going to have a nervous breakdown. I could taste the fear like metal on the back of my tongue. That's all I can say to explain it. And I walked into this big orthopedic shower. It's 4:30 in the morning. I took all my clothes off and I turned that shower on and I got down and I prayed to God. And I said, God, you don't have to make my wife well. You don't have to get me a bunch of money, but I need a little power. I need a little because I've got nothing and I can't do this. I am not up to this. And I stood up and nothing had changed. I was cleaner, but I was full of fear and the metal in my mouth and I'm shaking and I felt like I'd taken a noodle to a knife fight. I was like, well, that so much for that prayer stuff. And I walked back out and I'm walking down the hall and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have a nervous breakdown. This is what it feels like. And I walked into her room and I looked at her and I couldn't see her. It was too dark. So I sat down in the chair next to her bed and I started feeling her. I could feel my wife. I could feel her presence next to me. And I thought, wow, I wonder if this is like the sixth sense of really being in love with somebody. I know she's here. I wonder if I were blind and I was in a big house and I walked around, if I'd be able to find her. And I thought I would. I just had these weird curiosities. And I stood up and I put my hands on the side of her bed and I looked out this great big picture window. and looked out, and there were all these trees, and it was really dark. The sun was barely coming up way behind me. And I could see these birds, like these silhouettes of these birds jumping around. And I got kind of surprised, and I thought, whoa. It was breathtaking. I thought, the world is a beautiful place. I had that thought. And I looked down at my wife, and she has this real pale Welsh skin, and she was glowing. She looked like just beautiful. And I looked at her and thought, oh my God, I love her. Oh my God. And there was no fear. It was completely gone. And I realized I had great love in my life. I was not alone. And all I had to do is the next indicated thing. And that fear has never returned in 7 years. Now, I won't lie to you. It is very difficult taking care of someone who has brain damage that you love. It teaches you the definition of powerlessness every day. But we have a happy life. We laugh our asses off. I'm going to put it this way. I used to get really mad at AA meetings when I'd come to a meeting and the guy would come up to me and say, don't leave before the miracle happens. Do they say that out here? What the hell? And what are you going to say to that? You go, okay, right. And then you do a fifth step and you're like, I am in AA. And you go in and some jerk goes, don't leave before the miracle happens. And you're like, I want to kill you. And then you get a year chip. And at your year chip, somebody says, don't leave before the miracle happens. I'm like, what is the miracle? I thought these were it. And that's not it. That's not it. I know what the miracle is. I know now. I came here an animal. I pushed a pregnant woman down a flight of stairs and I didn't have a second thought about her. I was an animal. I dress my beautiful wife every day, and I can't believe my luck. I'm a human being now. That's a miracle. Thank you for having me.